Q-Min stared at the glowing screen in front of him. His 6 eyes moved across the data like they had done thousands of times before. Another day, another boring report about some small planet in the outer rim. The Galactic Coalition had been expanding for 300 years. They found new worlds every month. Most planets gave up without a fight. This planet was different, though. The locals called it Earth. The intelligence files said it had only one intelligent species. They called themselves humans. The reports showed they barely had space travel. A few small ships, nothing impressive. Their weapons were basic. Their technology was old. Q-Min as supervisor Dalho walked over to his desk. Dalho was older and had seen many conquests. His blue skin showed the scars of past battles, but those battles had been easy ones. The Coalition always won. "What do you think about this human world?" Dalho asked. He pointed at the screen with one of his forearms. "Same as always," Q-Min replied. "They will surrender when they see our fleet. Maybe they will try to negotiate. The smart ones always do." Dalho nodded. "The fleet arrives tomorrow. Admiral Dongsu expects this to be finished in a few days. The humans have no real military, just some police forces and basic defensive systems." Q-Min saved his report and closed the file. Earth was just another number on his list. By next week it would be another coalition world. The humans would become workers or citizens. The ones who resisted would be dealt with quietly. That was how these things always went. The next morning, Q-Min arrived at his office early. The first reports from the Earth system should be coming in. He expected to read about quick surrender talks or maybe some small resistance that was easily crushed. Instead, his screen showed emergency alerts. The first message made him read it twice. Then 3 times. Coalition Fast Attack Group 7 has taken heavy damage. Human forces launched immediate counterattack. Multiple ships lost. Q-Min felt confused. Heavy damage? The humans barely had a space fleet. How could they damage Coalition ships? He opened the detailed report and felt his skin turn cold. The human response had been instant and brutal. The moment Coalition ships entered their system, every human vessel had attacked. Not just military ships. Cargo haulers, mining ships, even passenger liners had been loaded with explosives and sent on suicide runs against Coalition vessels. The humans had no shields like Coalition ships. Their weapons were weak compared to Coalition technology. But they had something else. They fought like they had nothing to lose. Every human pilot seemed ready to die if it meant taking Coalition ships with them. More reports came in every hour. Each one was worse than the last. The Coalition fleet was winning, but the cost was terrible. For every human ship destroyed, they lost Coalition vessels too. The humans were making them pay for every meter of space. Q-Min called up the battle recordings. What he saw made his stomach sick. Human fighters, small and weak, would ram into Coalition cruisers and explode. The explosions were not random. The humans aimed for weak spots in Coalition ship design. They had studied Coalition technology and found ways to hurt them. But the worst part was the communications. Coalition forces had intercepted human radio messages during the battle. Q-Min listened to them and felt real fear for the first time in his life. The humans were not scared. They were angry. Their messages to each other were full of hate and determination. They talked about making the aliens pay. They planned attacks that would kill them but hurt the Coalition more. They seemed to want to die fighting rather than live under Coalition rule. One recording stood out. A human pilot and a damaged fighter was talking to his base. His ship was broken and leaking air. He should have been begging for rescue or trying to escape. Instead, he was asking for target information. He wanted to know which Coalition ship would hurt them most if he crashed into it. "Tell my family I made them pay," the human said, before his signal went dead. The Coalition had rules about war. You fought until victory was certain, then you stopped. You took prisoners when possible. You tried to save lives on both sides. War was about control, not destruction. The humans seemed to have different rules. They fought until they were all dead. They took no prisoners and asked for no mercy. War was about making the enemy suffer as much as possible. By the end of the first day, Admiral Dong-Su sent a message that shocked everyone at Coalition headquarters. He was requesting reinforcements, not just a few ships, but an entire battle fleet. The humans were fighting harder than any species the Coalition had ever faced. Q-Min spent the night reading every file about human history that Coalition scouts had gathered. What he found explained everything, and made it worse at the same time. Humans had been fighting wars for their entire history, not just between their species and others, but against each other. They had spent thousands of years learning how to kill efficiently. Every human invention seemed to have a military use. Every human advance made their weapons better. The files showed human conflicts that lasted decades. Wars where millions died for small pieces of land. Battles where humans fought even when defeat was certain. Stories of human soldiers who kept fighting after being wounded, who chose death over surrender, who found ways to hurt enemies even while dying. But the most frightening thing was how humans learned from each war. They studied their enemies and found weaknesses. They adapted their tactics constantly. They never fought the same way twice. The Coalition had fought many species. Some were stronger, some were smarter, some had better technology, but all of them fought to win with as few losses as possible. None of them had ever fought like humans. 3 days later, Admiral Dong-Su sent another message. The human home system was secured, but it had cost him half his fleet. The humans had lost everything: their space forces, their orbital stations, their defensive systems. But they had made the Coalition pay a price that no one had expected. The message that worried Q-Min most came at the end of Dong-Su's report. The humans on the planet's surface were not surrendering. They were preparing to fight on their own world. Intelligence suggested they were turning their entire planet into a weapon. Q-Min looked at his screen and realized that Earth was not going to be like other conquests. The Coalition had won the space battle, but the real war was just beginning. And for the first time in his career, he was not sure the Coalition would win. He filed his report and marked it with the highest priority level. Coalition Command needed to understand what they were facing. The humans were not just another species to be conquered. They were something new and dangerous. Something that fought like the galaxy had never seen before. 6 months had passed since the first battle at Earth. Q-Min now stood on the bridge of the Coalition flagship, Eternal Victory, watching through the viewing ports as human space unfolded before them. Admiral Tae-Wan, a veteran commander with victories on 40 worlds, paced behind him. But Tae-Wan did not look like a winner anymore. The human solar system had become a nightmare. What should have been a quick conquest had turned into the longest and bloodiest campaign in Coalition history. Every asteroid belt was filled with hidden weapons. Every space station had been turned into a fortress. The humans had 6 months to prepare, and they had used every day to make their space into a death trap. Report, Admiral Tae-Wan said to his communications officer. Attack Group 12 has taken the mining station at coordinates 77 Alpha, the officer replied. Human resistance was total. No survivors on either side. We lost 3 ships taking a facility that holds 50 humans. Q-Min marked another location on his tactical map. The same story repeated everywhere. Small groups of humans would hole up in stations, ships, or asteroid bases. They would fight until every single human was dead. But they always made sure to take Coalition forces with them. The humans had learned to use their own weaknesses as weapons. Their ships were smaller and weaker than Coalition vessels, so they loaded them with explosives and used them as guided missiles. Their weapons could not penetrate Coalition armor, so they aimed for joints and weak points that Coalition engineers had never thought to protect. Sir, called out the sensor operator, we are detecting another human ambush. 3 fighters hiding in the asteroid field ahead. 3 fighters? Admiral Tae-Wan laughed, but there was no humor in it. Send a squadron to deal with them. Q-Min watched the battle unfold on his screen. 12 Coalition fighters moved toward 3 human ships. The humans should have run or surrendered. Instead, they attacked immediately. The battle lasted only minutes, but when it was over, 6 Coalition fighters were destroyed and the other 6 were damaged. All 3 human fighters were gone, but they had traded their lives for twice their number. "This is impossible," Admiral Taiwan said quietly. "How do they keep doing this?" Q-Min had been studying human tactics for months. He thought he understood part of the answer. "They do not fight to win individual battles, sir. They fight to make us pay the highest price possible for everything we take." The Admiral turned to look at him. "Explain." "Every human position costs us more ships and soldiers than it should. They know they cannot stop us, but they can make us bleed for every victory. They are turning this war into a numbers game where they cannot lose." It was true. The coalition had started with overwhelming numerical advantage. They had expected to lose maybe 10% of their forces in the entire campaign. Instead, they were losing 10% every month. At this rate, the coalition would run out of ships before the humans ran out of places to fight. The next day brought worse news. Human raiders had struck deep inside coalition territory. Somehow human ships had traveled hundreds of light years to attack coalition supply lines. The raids were small, but they were happening everywhere at once. Q-Min studied the raid reports with growing worry. The humans were not just defending their home system anymore. They had gone on the attack. Coalition forces were now under threat, even in areas that should have been completely safe. "How are they doing this?" Admiral Taiwan demanded during the morning briefing. "Human ships are slow. They do not have the range for these kinds of operations." The intelligence chief, Bong Su, looked uncomfortable. "We believe they are using captured coalition technology, sir. They seem to be very good at adapting our systems to their needs." "Adapting how?" "They strip out safety systems and crew comfort features to make room for more weapons and fuel. Their ships are death traps by our standards, but they can travel farther and hit harder than anything their size should be able to do." Q-Min understood what this meant. Human crews were willing to travel in ships that coalition forces would consider too dangerous to fly. They accepted risks that no other species would take. This gave them capabilities that should have been impossible. The weeks that followed proved how dangerous human adaptability could be. Coalition forces would develop new tactics to counter human strategies, only to find that the humans had already changed their approach. Human defenders seemed to learn from every battle and find new ways to cause maximum damage. The breaking point came during the assault on the human industrial complex near their 4th planet. Intelligence had said the facility was lightly defended. It was supposed to be an easy target that would hurt human production capabilities. Instead, coalition forces found themselves facing the most sophisticated trap they had ever encountered. The humans had turned the entire complex into a weapon. Every building was rigged with explosives. Every corridor was a kill zone. The humans had even weaponized their industrial equipment. Q-Min watched the battle reports come in and felt sick. Coalition forces were taking terrible losses. Human defenders were fighting room by room, making coalition soldiers pay for every meter they advanced. But the worst part was still coming. When coalition forces finally took the complex, they discovered that the humans had been using them. Every coalition soldier who entered the facility was being scanned and recorded. The humans were learning about coalition equipment, tactics, and weaknesses even while they died. The final horror came when the last human defender activated a massive explosion that destroyed the entire facility. The blast was so large that it took out coalition ships in orbit. In their final moment, the humans had turned their own industrial complex into a weapon that killed thousands of coalition forces. Admiral Taiwan stood in the ruins of his command center afterward, staring at casualty reports that no one wanted to believe. Of the 50,000 coalition soldiers who had assaulted the facility, fewer than 15,000 were still alive. The humans had numbered maybe 5,000, and they were all dead. But they had made the coalition pay a price of 3 lives for every human killed. "This is not war," Admiral Taiwan said quietly. "This is madness." Q-Min looked at his commander and realized that something had broken inside the admiral. Taiwan had conquered dozens of worlds. He had fought against species with better technology, larger armies, and superior tactics. But he had never fought against anyone willing to die just to hurt their enemies. The humans were teaching the coalition something that no species had ever shown them before. War was not just about strategy and technology, it was about will. And human will seemed to be unlimited. As Q-Min filed his daily report, he added a note that he knew would upset Coalition Command. The human home system was not even half conquered, but Coalition forces were already showing signs of breaking down. Soldiers were requesting transfers away from the human front. Officers were suffering mental breakdowns. Entire units were refusing orders to assault human positions. The humans were not just winning through tactics and adaptation. They were winning by being so horrible to fight against that their enemies did not want to face them anymore. And the most frightening thing was that this was only the beginning. The prisoner facility on Station Omega-7 was supposed to be temporary. Coalition forces had captured several hundred humans during the war, and Command wanted to understand how they thought. Q-Min had been transferred there to lead the Yami interrogation efforts. His job was to find weaknesses in human psychology that could be used against them. The first thing that surprised him was how the humans acted in captivity. Most species became depressed or angry when captured. Some tried to escape. Others tried to bargain for better treatment. The humans did something different. They seemed curious about their captors. Ha-Newell was the most senior human prisoner. She had been a Marine officer before her capture. Coalition forces had found her in the ruins of a human outpost, badly wounded, but still trying to set off explosives that would have killed everyone in the area, including herself. "Why do you want to talk to me?" Ha-Newell asked during their first meeting. She sat calmly across from Q-Min in the interrogation room, showing no fear or anger. "We want to understand your people," Q-Min replied. "This war has been unexpected." Ha-Newell smiled, and the expression made Q-Min uncomfortable. "You thought we would surrender quickly. Most species do when faced with overwhelming force. Most species have not spent their entire history fighting each other." Ha-Newell leaned forward. "Do you want to know what makes humans different?" Q-Min nodded, though he was not sure he wanted to hear the answer. "We have been at war for thousands of years, not with aliens like you, but with ourselves. Every human tribe, nation, and empire has been born in conflict. We have fought over everything. Land, resources, ideas, religion. We have developed weapons specifically designed to kill other humans." She paused and looked directly at Q-Min with her strange, forward-facing eyes. "By the time you arrived, we had already perfected the art of total war. You are not fighting a species that learned warfare recently. You are fighting a species that has made warfare into science." Over the following weeks, Q-Min conducted dozens of interviews with human prisoners. Each conversation made him more disturbed. The humans were not hiding their capabilities or trying to mislead him. Instead, they seemed eager to explain exactly how dangerous they were. Another prisoner, a young man named Hyunwoo, had been captured during the assault on human station Alpha 12. He had been a civilian engineer before the war started. Now he calmly described how he had helped turn civilian equipment into weapons. "We took mining charges and turned them into ship killers," Hyunwoo explained. "We used construction mechs as combat suits. We even weaponized our waste disposal systems. Everything humans build can be turned into a weapon if you know how." "But you were civilians," Q-Min said. "Why did you fight? You could have evacuated or surrendered." Hyunwoo looked confused by the question. "Because you invaded our home. What else would we do? Most species try to negotiate. They look for ways to coexist." "Coexist with invaders?" Hyunwoo shook his head. "That is not how humans think. When someone attacks us, we attack back harder. We do not stop until either we win or we are all dead." The interviews continued for months. Q-Min learned about human history from people who had lived it. They told him about wars that lasted generations, about conflicts where entire populations chose death over surrender, about battles where humans fought even when victory was impossible. But the most disturbing conversations were about human children. An older prisoner named Sunja had been a teacher before the war. She described how human schools had been converted into training camps. "We taught the children how to make explosives from household chemicals," Sunja said without any shame. We showed them how to sabotage equipment and gather intelligence. Even our youngest citizens became part of the war effort. You turned children into soldiers? We turned children into survivors. When your people come to a human world, everyone fights. There are no civilians in a human war. There are only combatants and future combatants. Min felt sick. The Coalition had rules about protecting non-combatants, especially children. They tried to minimize civilian casualties and preserve innocent life. The humans seemed to have no such concepts. Everyone was a potential weapon. The worst revelation came during an interview with Minho, an elderly human who had been captured while trying to poison a Coalition water supply. He spoke calmly about his plan to kill hundreds of Coalition soldiers. In Namai, our last great war, we learned that old people make excellent weapons, Minho explained. We are not strong enough to fight directly, but we can go places that young soldiers cannot. We can gain trust from enemies who see us as harmless. We can carry out missions that require patience and sacrifice. You used elderly people as weapons? We used everyone as weapons. That is what total war means. Every human, from birth to death, is part of the military effort. We do not have armies and civilians. We have only humans, and all humans fight. As the months passed, Cumin began to understand the true horror of what the Coalition faced. The humans were not just another species with different tactics. They were a species that had evolved to wage total war. Every human innovation had military applications. Their medicine was designed to keep soldiers fighting longer. Their engineering focused on building things that could be quickly converted to weapons. Their education system trained every citizen to think like a soldier. But the most frightening aspect was their psychology. Humans did not see war as a temporary interruption of normal life. They saw war as the natural state of existence. Peace was just the time between conflicts when they prepared for the next fight. Newell summed it up during one of their final conversations. Your Coalition fights wars to achieve goals. You want to conquer territory, gain resources, or enforce political control. When you achieve those goals, the war ends. That is how war works, Cumin replied. Not for humans. Humans fight wars to destroy enemies. We do not want to control you or use you. We want to make sure you can never threaten us again. Our goal is not victory. Our goal is the complete elimination of the threat you represent. But that would mean total war until one side is completely destroyed. Yes. Hanuel's expression remained calm. That is what you started when you invaded our system. You began a war that will only end when either all humans are dead or all Coalition forces are eliminated. Cumin left the interrogation facility with a report that would terrify Coalition command. The humans were not fighting a conventional war. They were fighting a war of extermination. They would not negotiate, would not surrender, and would not stop fighting until one side was completely destroyed. Worst comma. They were good at it. Thousands of years of constant warfare had turned humans into the most efficient killers the galaxy had ever seen. They understood war in ways that the Coalition could barely comprehend. The Coalition had started this conflict thinking they were conquering another primitive world. Instead, they had awakened something that threatened the existence of every species in Coalition space. And the humans were just getting started. 3 years into the war, Q-Min stood in Coalition Central Command watching the galaxy map flicker with red warning lights. Each light represented a Coalition member species that was reconsidering their involvement in the human war. What had started as a simple conquest was now threatening to tear apart the greatest alliance in galactic history. The Zephyrian ambassador spoke first during the emergency session. His people were known as fierce warriors who had helped conquer dozens of worlds. Now he looked tired and afraid. The Zephyrian Republic formally requests withdrawal from all human combat operations, the ambassador announced. We have lost 90% of our ground forces in human territory. Our Marines refuse to deploy against human positions. We cannot continue. Admiral Tai Wan, who had been promoted to Coalition Strategic Command after the previous admiral had suffered a complete mental breakdown, looked around the room. Ambassador, your forces are among our best. If the Zephyrians withdraw, then we survive. The ambassador interrupted. "Admiral, my people have fought in 200 campaigns. We have never retreated from any enemy. But humans are not enemies. They are a force of nature. You do not fight hurricanes or supernovas. You avoid them." Similar scenes had been playing out for months. The crystalline hegemony had recalled their entire fleet after humans developed sonic weapons, specifically designed to shatter silicon-based life forms. The Aquatic Federation refused to send more ships after human forces demonstrated they could wage war underwater, better than species that lived in oceans. But the worst defection was the Veltari Empire, Q-Min's own people. The Veltari had been founding members of the coalition. They had provided the strategic planning for most coalition conquests. Now they were pulling back to their core worlds and refusing all contact with human forces. Q-Min, quote S, supervisor, Dalho, explained the decision during a private meeting. "Our psychologists have studied the combat reports. Extended exposure to human warfare tactics causes permanent mental damage to Veltari soldiers. We have documented cases of soldiers becoming unable to function in normal society after fighting humans." "What kind of damage?" Q-Min asked. "They become paranoid, violent, unable to trust anyone. Some develop what our doctors call human syndrome. They start thinking like humans. They see every interaction as a potential conflict. They begin planning how to kill everyone they meet." Q-Min understood. He had been studying humans for 3 years, and he could feel the changes in himself. He found himself analyzing coalition personnel for weaknesses. He caught himself planning escape routes from every room he entered. The human way of thinking was infectious. The breaking point came when humans launched Operation Prometheus. After 3 years of defensive fighting, human forces went on the offensive. Somehow they had built new ships and trained new crews despite being under constant attack. Even worse, they had learned to use captured coalition technology better than the species that invented it. Human strike forces appeared simultaneously across 47 coalition systems. They did not try to hold territory or establish bases. Instead, they demonstrated that human forces could reach any coalition world anytime they wanted. The attacks were precisely targeted to cause maximum psychological damage. Human raiders hit civilian targets on coalition homeworlds, not to cause casualties but to prove that nowhere in coalition space was safe. They destroyed monuments, government buildings, and military academies. The message was clear. Humans could kill anyone anywhere, whenever they chose. Q-Min received detailed reports of each raid. The humans showed a terrifying understanding of coalition psychology. They knew exactly which targets would cause the most fear and which tactics would break coalition morale most effectively. On the Veltari homeworld, human raiders destroyed the Museum of Galactic Peace. The building had no military value, but it represented everything the coalition claimed to stand for. Its destruction was a message that the coalition's ideals meant nothing to human forces. On the crystalline hegemony's capital world, humans used harmonic weapons to crack the Great Resonance Chamber, a religious site that had existed for thousands of years. The attack was perfectly calculated to cause maximum cultural trauma while avoiding massive casualties. But the most sophisticated attack targeted the Aquatic Federation's deep ocean cities. Human forces somehow developed pressure suits that allowed them to fight at depths that should have been impossible for air-breathing species. They proved that humans could adapt to any environment and fight effectively in conditions where they should not be able to survive. Each raid lasted only hours, but the psychological impact lasted months. Coalition citizens began demanding that their governments end the war immediately. Protests erupted on dozens of worlds. Some coalition species began making secret peace overtures to human forces. Admiral Taiwan called an emergency meeting of remaining coalition leadership. Only half the original member species were still participating in combat operations. The others had either withdrawn completely or were providing only minimal support. "We need to discuss ending this war," Admiral Taiwan said quietly. The words would have been unthinkable 3 years earlier. The coalition had never failed to conquer a target world. General Kyung-ho of the Reptilian Guard spoke up. And it how? The humans have made it clear they will not negotiate. They want us completely destroyed. Maybe we should consider giving them what they want, suggested Ambassador One-Sick of the gaseous collectives. We withdraw from human space entirely. We avoid all contact with human worlds. We let them exist in isolation. And then what? Admiral Taewon asked. Wait for them to build a bigger fleet and come after us? The humans have proven they can reach our core worlds. Isolation will not protect us. Cumin had been quiet during the meeting, but now he spoke up. There is another option. Everyone turned to look at him. He took a deep breath before continuing. We could surrender. The room erupted in angry voices. Coalition species did not surrender. They were the conquerors, not the conquered. The idea was impossible to accept. But Admiral Taewon raised his hand for silence. Explain. We formally surrender to human forces. We admit defeat and ask for mercy. We hope that human leaders are rational enough to accept victory without total extermination. And if they are not rational? General Kyung-ho asked. Then we die. Cumin replied simply. But we are dying anyway. At least this way, some coalition worlds might survive. The meeting ended without any decisions, but Cumin knew the end was coming. Coalition forces were collapsing everywhere. Supply lines were broken. Morale was destroyed. Entire fleets were refusing orders to engage human forces. The final proof came when Admiral Taewon himself suffered a complete mental breakdown. Cumin found him in his quarters, sitting in the dark and staring at battle reports. The Admiral had been one of the Coalition's finest military minds. Now he could barely speak coherently. They are not soldiers, Admiral Taewon whispered. They are demons. We should never have gone to their world. We should have left them alone. Cumin looked at his broken commander and realized that the war was already over. The Coalition had lost not just military battles, but their will to fight. The humans had won by being so terrible to fight against that their enemies would rather face extinction than continue the war. Within weeks, Coalition forces began a general retreat from human space. Not because they were ordered to, but because no one was willing to fight humans anymore. The greatest military alliance in galactic history was falling apart, and it was all because they had attacked one small world full of creatures that refused to be conquered. The humans had done something no species in galactic history had ever accomplished. They had defeated the Coalition not through superior technology or numbers, but through pure, terrifying determination to make their enemies suffer until they gave up. And according to intelligence reports, the humans were just getting started. The fourth year of the war marked the beginning of the Great Retreat. Cumin stood on the command deck of the evacuation ship Final Hope, watching Coalition forces flee from human space in complete disorder. What had been the most organized military force in galactic history was now a collection of broken units running for their lives. The evacuation was supposed to be orderly. Coalition forces would withdraw in stages, destroying strategic assets and maintaining defensive lines. Instead, it had become a panicked rout. Human forces pursued the retreating Coalition fleets like predators chasing wounded prey. Enemy contact, reported the sensor operator. His voice shook with fear that had become common among Coalition personnel. Human hunter-killer group approaching from coordinates 479. Admiral Taewon, who had returned to duty after his breakdown but was clearly still unstable, laughed bitterly. Hunter-killers. That is what they call themselves now. Not ships or fleets. Hunters. Cumin watched the tactical display as human vessels closed in on Coalition evacuees. The human ships were bizarre constructions that barely looked like spacecraft. They had been built from captured Coalition technology, human engineering, and what looked like pure desperation. They should not have been able to function, but they were faster and deadlier than anything the Coalition had ever faced. The human pursuit tactics were unlike anything in military doctrine. They did not try to capture territory or control space lanes. Instead, they hunted individual coalition ships like animals. Every retreating vessel became a target for human predators who seemed to appear out of nowhere. "They are using our own hyperspace routes against us," reported the navigation officer. "Somehow they have mapped every coalition trade route and military supply line. They know where we are going before we get there." The worst part was that humans had learned coalition military procedures better than coalition forces knew them themselves. Human raiders would appear at coalition supply depots just as relief ships arrived. They would ambush coalition fleets at rendezvous points that should have been secret. It was as if the humans could predict every coalition movement. Lieutenant Sang Min, one of the few surviving intelligence analysts, provided the answer. "Sir, we believe the humans have been studying our operations for the entire war. Every battle, every retreat, every tactical decision has been recorded and analyzed. They understand how we think better than we understand how they think." The evidence was overwhelming. Human forces would set traps specifically designed to exploit coalition psychological weaknesses. They knew which species would break under pressure and which would fight to the death. They adjusted their tactics for each enemy they faced, using different approaches against different coalition races. Against the Veltari, humans used confusion and misdirection, attacking from multiple directions to overwhelm their careful planning. Against the crystalline species, they used sonic weapons and vibration attacks that could shatter silicon-based biology. Against the Aquatic Federation, they had somehow developed underwater combat capabilities that surpassed species that lived in oceans. But the most terrifying discovery was how humans had reverse-engineered coalition technology. They had not just copied coalition devices, they had improved them. Human ships were faster than coalition vessels because they had removed safety systems. Human weapons were more powerful because they had eliminated protection features that prevented overload. "They treat their own lives as acceptable losses," observed Chief Engineer Insu during a damage assessment meeting. "Coalition technology is designed to keep crews safe. Human modifications assume the crew will die anyway, so they optimize for maximum damage to enemies." This philosophy made human forces incredibly dangerous but also completely unpredictable. Coalition commanders could not anticipate human tactics because no rational species would accept the casualty rates that humans considered normal. The evacuation route from the outer rim stations became a killing ground. Human forces had positioned themselves along every escape route, turning the retreat into a running battle that lasted for months. Coalition ships that tried to flee individually were hunted down and destroyed. Those that traveled in groups were attacked by human wolf packs that struck without warning and vanished before coalition forces could respond. Q-Min documented every engagement, creating a record of how thoroughly the coalition was being outfought. In battle after battle, human forces achieved impossible results through tactics that no other species would consider. During the evacuation of Station Gamma Prime, human forces used captured coalition shuttles to infiltrate the evacuation fleet. They waited until coalition ships were loaded with refugees, then triggered explosions that destroyed entire vessels. The attack killed thousands of coalition civilians, but it also demonstrated that humans could strike anywhere, anytime, using the coalition's own equipment against them. The psychological warfare was even more effective than the direct attacks. Human forces began broadcasting messages on coalition communication frequencies. The messages were not threats or demands for surrender. Instead, they were detailed descriptions of how coalition forces would die. "Attention Coalition Fleet 7 Alpha," one message began. "You are traveling to rendezvous point Omega 12. We will be waiting for you there. Your lead ship will be destroyed first, followed by your supply vessels. Your escort fighters will be eliminated using their own missiles, which we have learned to reprogram mid-flight. Estimated survival time for your fleet, 17 minutes. The message was followed by detailed tactical analysis of coalition fleet composition, weapon capabilities, and likely response patterns. Worst of all, the human predictions were usually accurate. Coalition fleets would arrive at their destinations to find human forces waiting exactly where the messages had predicted, using exactly the tactics that had been described. Some coalition Commanders tried to change their plans after receiving human messages, but this often made things worse. The humans seemed to have planned for every possible coalition response. Alternative routes led to different traps. Changed tactics played into different human strategies. It was as if the humans had war-gamed every possible scenario and prepared responses for all of them. The final evacuation from the human solar system became the most devastating defeat in coalition history. Admiral Taiwan personally led the last coalition fleet to leave human space, taking with him the survivors of what had once been a 50 million strong invasion force. Of those 50 million coalition personnel, fewer than 3 million survived to reach coalition core worlds. The rest had been killed in battle, captured by human forces, or simply vanished in the chaos of retreat. The casualty rate was so high that some coalition species faced extinction as viable military forces. But the worst losses were not the ships and soldiers. The coalition had lost something more important: their belief in their own superiority. For 300 years, coalition forces had been the predators of the galaxy. Now they had met something that was better at predation than they were. As the final hope crossed into coalition space, Q-Min received one last message from human forces. It was not a threat or a boast. It was a simple statement that made his blood freeze. Thank you for teaching us about galactic military capabilities. The lessons have been very educational. We look forward to applying what we have learned. The message was signed by someone calling themselves Human Strategic Command. Q-Min realized that the humans had not just been fighting a war. They had been conducting a learning exercise. Every coalition tactic, every weapon system, every strategic doctrine had been studied and analyzed. The coalition retreat was over, but the real war was just beginning. And now the humans knew everything they needed to know about how the galaxy fought wars. They were coming next, and they would be ready for anything the coalition could throw at them. 5 years after first contact with humanity, Q-Min sat alone in a coalition military tribunal chamber. The once grand hall was nearly empty. Most coalition species had withdrawn from joint operations entirely. Only a few representatives remained to hear testimony about the greatest military disaster in galactic history. Q-Min was the last surviving intelligence officer from the original Earth expedition. Everyone else was dead, missing, or had suffered complete mental breakdowns. He had been called to testify about what had gone wrong, how the most powerful military alliance in the galaxy had been defeated by a single world. The tribunal chairman, an elderly Veltari named Jang Ho, looked tired. His species had lost 3 entire fleets to human forces. The psychological trauma had been so severe that most Veltari now refused to serve in any military capacity. Officer Q-Min, Chairman Jang Ho began, you have observed human forces longer than any surviving coalition personnel. In your professional opinion, what made this enemy so dangerous? Q-Min had been preparing for this question for months. How could he explain something that defied all military logic? Honored Chairman, the coalition has always fought other civilizations. Species with governments, military structures, and rational leaders who could be negotiated with or defeated through conventional tactics. Humans are not a civilization in any sense we understand. Explain. Humans are a weapon system that has achieved consciousness. Every aspect of their society, culture, and technology is designed for warfare. They do not have armies. Their entire population is a military force. They do not have weapons. Everything they create can be turned into a weapon. They do not fight wars. They exist in a permanent state of conflict preparation. The tribunal members looked uncomfortable. Some species had theorized that humans were artificial constructs created by an unknown enemy to destroy the coalition. The alternative, that such creatures could evolve naturally, was too frightening to accept. Their tactical capabilities, asked General Minseo, representing the few remaining coalition military forces. Unlimited adaptation. Humans learn from every engagement and immediately modify their approach. We never fought the same human force, twice because they were constantly evolving their tactics. By the end of the war, human forces were using our own weapons, ships, and strategies better than we could. Q-Min paused. remembering battles where human forces had outmaneuvered coalition fleets, using tactics that coalition commanders had invented. The humans had not just copied coalition methods, they had perfected them. But the most dangerous aspect was their psychology. Humans do not fight to achieve goals like territory or resources. They fight to eliminate threats. When we invaded their system, we became a threat that had to be completely destroyed. Negotiation was impossible because humans do not see war as a political tool. For them, war is an existential conflict that ends only when one side is extinct. General Min Seo leaned forward. Are you saying they wanted to exterminate all coalition species? No, General. I am saying they wanted to make sure we could never threaten them again. Total extermination was one option. Breaking our will to fight was another. They chose the option that required less effort. The truth was worse than genocide. Humans had demonstrated that they could destroy the coalition whenever they wanted. Instead, they had chosen to psychologically break coalition forces so thoroughly that most species would never again consider offensive military action. Ambassador Dong Jin, from the gaseous collectives, asked the question everyone feared. What about reports of human expansion beyond their original system? Human felt cold. This was the information that would end the coalition as a political entity. Confirmed, Ambassador. Long-range scouts have detected human activity in 47 systems. They are not just expanding, they are fortifying. Every new human world is being turned into a military fortress. The silence in the chamber was absolute. The implication was clear. The war had not been about defending Earth. It had been about testing human capabilities against galactic standard opposition. The humans had used the coalition as a training exercise. Furthermore, Q-Min continued, intelligence suggests that Earth was not the only human world. We have evidence of human colonies that predate our invasion. The war was fought by humans from a single world. The full extent of human population and military capabilities remains unknown. Chairman Jang Ho stood up slowly. Officer Q-Min, are you telling this tribunal that we fought a war against a fraction of human forces and lost? Yes, honored Chairman. Based on captured human communications, Earth contained approximately 8 billion humans. Latest estimates suggest there may be 50 billion humans scattered across dozens of worlds. We fought less than 10% of total human population. The implications were staggering. If humans from one world could destroy coalition military power, what could 50 billion humans accomplish? The galaxy suddenly seemed like a very small place. The final question came from Dr. Yunji, a coalition psychologist who had been studying the mental health crisis among veterans of the human war. Officer Q-Min, in your opinion, what should the coalition do now? Q-Min had thought about this question every day for the past year. There were no good answers. Withdraw, Doctor. Abandon all territory within 100 light-years of known human space. Establish monitoring stations at maximum safe distance. Hope that humans decide we are no longer a threat worth eliminating. And if they continue expanding toward coalition, space, then we evacuate further. Humans have proven they can outfight us, outthink us, and outlast us. Direct confrontation will only result in our complete destruction. The tribunal ended with no formal conclusions, but the outcome was obvious. Within months, the coalition would officially dissolve as a military alliance. Member species would withdraw to their core worlds and hope that isolation would protect them from human expansion. Some species were already making desperate preparations. The crystalline hegemony was building hidden colonies in distant star systems. The Aquatic Federation was seeking uninhabitable water worlds where they might hide from human detection. The Veltari Empire was developing cloaking technology to make their worlds invisible to human sensors. But Q-Min knew it was pointless. Humans had demonstrated an ability to find and fight enemies anywhere in the galaxy. If they wanted to hunt down coalition species, no hiding place would be safe enough. As he left the tribunal chamber, Q-Min encountered Admiral Tae-Wan in the corridor. The former coalition commander looked like a broken man. The stress of fighting. Humans had aged him decades in just 5 years. Do you think they will come for us? Admiral Taiwan asked quietly. Q-Min considered lying, but the Admiral deserved honesty. Eventually, when they are ready, when they decide that leaving potential enemies alive is too dangerous. How long do we have? Unknown. Humans think in terms of decades and centuries. They may wait a generation to build up their forces. They may strike tomorrow. The only certainty is that they will not forget what we did. Admiral Taiwan nodded sadly. I should have listened to you years ago. We should have left them alone. As Q-Min walked away, he reflected on the ultimate irony of the human war. The Coalition had invaded Earth to add another world to their empire. Instead, they had awakened a force that would reshape the entire galaxy. Humans were no longer confined to a single system. They were expanding, learning, and preparing for conflicts that might not come for centuries. And when those conflicts arrived, they would be ready. The galaxy had gained a new apex predator, and every other species was now potential prey. Q-Min was the sole witness to humanity's introduction to galactic civilization. He alone understood what they truly represented, and he knew that the story he had lived through was not ending. It was just the beginning.